Hello there, and welcome to the Karmic Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Engles Witter, and the goal of this podcast is super simple, just to make it easier than ever before for anyone to find happiness and fulfillment in their everyday life by using the wisdom teachings that have already been passed down to us for millennia, and to occasionally dispel some popular myths, especially in the New Age spirituality, which really hold us back without our even knowing. Now, in this episode, I'm going to have a conversation with a friend of the podcast, Dr. Leyden. We're going to be talking about her forthcoming book, Embodying Grace. Now, for over 3 decades, Dr. Leyden has been a trauma healing expert, a transformational leader, and a spiritual mentor, and her work focuses on us truly embodying our spirituality through the healing power of the heart-brain-body connection, the 5 stages of embodied grace, and the grace process, which she describes in detail in her upcoming book. So we're going to have a conversation about all of that in this episode. So go ahead, grab your favorite beverage, find a comfy spot to sit down and settle in for this really heart-opening and inspiring conversation that I truly hope will empower you to embrace grace, healing, and fulfillment. Before we do that, also, just a quick reminder to subscribe to the podcast here on YouTube if that's where you're watching it, and anywhere that you can find podcasts, including iTunes. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. So, Lori, welcome to the Karmic Warrior podcast. Again, you are a friend of this podcast. You've been here before, so welcome again.
Thank you. I'm always excited to figure out what is going to come through us.
I know. Well, for those people who haven't listened to our other podcasts together, you need to listen to my other podcast with Lori as well. But I just want to take a moment to let listeners know about how we know each other and how we met. And I think it was really cool how we met at a event. We were both in Orlando, Florida, at one of our colleagues' events. And it was the very first day. I remember we were VIPs, and it was the very first day, and we were paired up to do these little, get to know you type of exercises. And in that exercise, you said who you were, and I was like, oh my God, I've heard of you before. I've been like, people keep telling me I'm supposed to meet. You're the one who's like done all of the tapping in Rwanda and done all of this work. I've heard of you, Project Light. Oh my God. And then I think the same had happened for you. Like, you had heard of me before you had seen me with Barbara Marks Hubbard, who is was a mutual colleague and friend of ours. So it was just like, we hit it off right away, didn't we?
I think I said to you, where have you been? Like,
Yeah.
what took you so long? Like, when you meet a sister of the heart or a brother of the heart, it's always a celebration. And just to drop into, and then the exploration of what did we have in common, which led to the last 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, we should even mention that the conference, or the event that we were at, happened right before COVID. So then you and we made a connection there, but I think partly because of COVID, we became really close friends really quickly and started meeting every week via Zoom, because it's like, well, we're sequestered, we're inside. So then, yeah, this really deep friendship started to develop. And I'm just telling for listeners to know, Lori and I met every week for, I think, 2 years.
Yes.
2 good solid years. Every week we had our Wednesday afternoon meeting, and it was just to either catch up on work or let each other know about the projects that we were working on. And it was through that we became, we really started to understand how close our work was, like in terms of what we do in the world and how we get it out there. So I'm just going to dive in from there and just say right off the bat that Lori has something very exciting happening. She has a book coming out, Embodying Grace, on September 14th, and it's going to be available on Kindle, and I'll have the link in the show notes for you. It's going to be $1.99 on September 14th. Highly recommend it. We're going to dig into that today with Lori. And this whole evolution of embodying grace for you is such a beautiful story. And I came in 2020 and you told me, oh, I have a book that it's all written, but then you were working on it, but it was over the course of those last few years that a whole other level of this work emerged for you. So I'm just going to open that up and just give us a little bit of a taster teaser of what this book has in store for our listeners.
Yes. So this book encapsulates the wisdom that I've garnered over 20 years, the last 20 years, and my humanitarian work and my spiritual mentoring work and my work as a trauma healing professional. And it's so exciting to bring this, I'm calling it the Embodying Grace framework now, which, and you and I have had this conversation when we first embarked on our spiritual journey. I didn't see a template for it. I didn't see what I call a heart map for it. I saw a lot of amazingly wise people talking about the ephemeral and the mystical aspects of our spiritual journey. But I know when I started on my journey, which is literally to heal my own traumas first. So it was totally self-serving. But what had emerged are these 5 stages of embodied grace, which we'll talk about. But the Embodying Grace framework is 3 aspects. First is the power of the heart-brain-body connection, in which I believe, and I believe science is proving, that we are hardwired for our divinity. So profound and many experiences about that. The second piece is these 5 stages of embodied grace. Where are we on our spiritual journey? Begins with separation, ends with synergy. We'll talk about that our primary core wound, I believe, is separation from the divine, and every other trauma is simply triggered by that. And as we learn to heal that separation from the divine trauma, we find the seeds of our destiny, which we can talk a little bit more about. And then finally, the third piece of the framework is called the grace process, which I received after a near-death experience 20 years ago, which I asked, how can I bring more elegant forms of healing into the world? And I received this formula, which we'll talk about, which is really about transcending your ego so you can live in heart coherence. And that is a way that we heal most effectively and also impact healing in our world. Little did I know 20 years ago when I received this formula that there would be all kinds of evidence to prove that it works with all the thousands of people I've worked with around the world. And that I could combine the most effective trauma healing techniques, somatic release techniques, with the grace process, which is also a somatic release technique. So I'm able now to bring this work in a very coherent way to more people. And that's what excites me the most about how do we bring this work to the most people in a simple way that makes spiritual growth and transformation much more elegant and graceful than what it has been.
Yeah, beautiful. And I want to talk a little bit about your journey and how this body of work fits into it, because of course you really have done so. You've been in the trenches in situations, working in Rwanda with the survivors of genocide. You were one of the first people at Sandy Hook with the school shootings. And so what I love about what you've done is you've used all of your own framework and everything that you're talking about in these horrific situations. But what I understand about your body of work now is that you're not really, you're now really focused on life after trauma. So it's not about, this book and this body of work isn't about like, okay, you're in acute trauma and you're dealing with this major trauma. I would love for you to maybe just talk a little bit more into that, and how that came to be, just that journey from working in the trenches, really, of these very, very horrific scenes and experiences, and then figuring out, how can I bridge that now and bring that to, I want to say, the everyday person who doesn't go through those types of experiences, or maybe they have gone through trauma, but they've already worked with a therapist. They've already done some healing work. But I sort of see like this body of work as the next step, like what's going to take me the rest of the way home. So that makes sense.
And thank you for framing it that way, because, well, there's a lot of different ways to boil this down. But as you mentioned, this work is not a tome for how to heal your deepest traumas if you're acutely triggered in the moment. This is about what happens when you've achieved some level of resiliency, and come to a place of, well, now what? And it all stems from, as I referred to, I had a number of childhood traumas that really, broke my heart open to trying to find the answers. So as a child, going through all these traumas that I went through, certainly not as bad as the environments I've worked in, but trauma is is personal to each of us, and what traumatizes one person doesn't traumatize another. But at the same time, when we really honor, I believe that we're here in this lifetime for two reasons. One is to heal our original trauma, which is the wound of separation from the divine. And then as we heal that, we find the seeds of our destiny in our passions that emerge from that, so that we can then become the unique divine expression of who we came here to be. And you and I share that passion around making sure people remember the truth of who they really are. And so this is really about healing from wholeness, not brokenness, and to be able to see our lives in the context of, what stage are we in at any particular time in our growth? Are we in separation, which is level one, if you will, or stirring, which is the stage that comes after we're in so much pain that we decide to start buying the books and going to the workshops. And we're in this state, I call it stirring, where we're searching for the answers to, why is this happening? And this is generally the longest stage for us. And then we hopefully move into surrender. And that means surrendering our ego attachments, not giving up, but giving into our divine nature. Then hopefully we move into stillness, which is where we receive all those fabulous divine guidance and connect with our divinity, and synergy, where we start to feel that sense of connectedness with every part of ourselves. And then that's when we begin to reach out and find people like yourself, how we start to find each other in that external synergy of shared passions. I know that sounds like a lot as an answer, but it's the beginning. And then we need tools to be able to move from one stage to the next. How do we transcend our egos and really, truly embody heart coherence, which is what the book goes into in a
Yeah,
great.
I would love for you actually just to take a moment or two to touch on this heart coherence. Well, you use some different languaging that I really like the heart map. Um, I don't know if you want to speak into that, but also the heart brain connection. So maybe if you could, yeah, just give us a little snippet on what that is.
Yeah. Probably the most important thing that I could say to anyone, including myself, is that the answer to our spiritual growth and global healing is in personal physiological regulation. Period. Ba-dum-bum. And people will say, well, I don't know what that means. And there's a lot of talk about the vagus nerve now and the trauma response. And these are things that you and I have been dealing with for 30 years. We've known this to be true. And how beautiful that now it's in the current acceptable, language. So bottom line is, Heart Math Institute and Joseph Chilton Pearce, Biology of Transcendence, David Hawkins, Power versus Force, Bruce Lipton, Greg Braden, they all validate this work of the Heart Math Institute and the Embodying Grace framework. So imagine that the first human organ, first organ to form in the human fetus is the heart. I'm sorry. And the heart has its own brain. And though the heart's brain has the same neuronal cells as the neuronal cells in our prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of our highest human experience and gifts. And so it requires our physiology to be in balance, because when we are in states of fear and anger and anxiety, the heart is communicating with the reptilian brain, which is the part of us that, is in fight, flight, freeze, response mode. We don't have access to those higher brain functions, which are intuition, creative problem solving, a sense of connectedness, transcendency, really literally having the availability to receive the answers we need in the moment. And we have all of that right inside of ourselves. And I like to say we have the medicine in our fingertips. We have the medicine right in our bodies. And so much of my work is about somatic release and being able to optimize that heart, brain, body connection so that all the work is client-centered. All the work is about holding space for that client to come up with their own intuition, their own ahas, because we know that's where healing happens, is in an experience, not with someone telling you, oh, Lisa, just think this way. And so it's very much grounded in somatic release work. And then from that place, when the people we work with, including ourselves, when we bring our own work, when we optimize our own heart, brain, body connection, we're literally creating a space for healing to unfold for ourselves and the people we're working with.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point for us to be very well resourced. Another word I guess we could use in this, but that's what I hear when you're saying we do this work. But the heart brain connection helps us to become very well resourced, or in my language is power filled, because I work with the power loss and the powerlessness. So becoming power filled, so that when you start to use the grace process, that it actually takes effect, like it becomes a catalyst immediately. Do you, and this is sort of, I just thought of this, but are there any like signs or symptoms or telltale signs of like, oh, you need to be more, you need to do more work a little bit first around the heart brain connection before you go on to this next step? Are there any telltale signs that you have for that?
Yes, and it's easier to kind of backtrack a little bit with that. I think when people read the book, they'll find the 5 stages of embodied grace that show exactly what those characteristics and emotional and physiological feelings are in each one of the stages. And when I first introduced this, I remember thinking to myself, nobody's going to want to say that they're in the stage of separation. Everyone's going to want to say that they're in a higher stage. And it was amazing, as you and I did, 660 people signed up for that workshop. And people were excited to find out, oh my gosh, this separation, I understand it. I've been feeling this angst and this disconnect. Now that I can name it, and now that I've been given a tool to move to the next stage, there's such a sense of relief.
Yeah.
And so this is a good point to emphasize. What's most important, because you and I, we can jump into these discussions, really deep. We can jump in and forget about the bigger context, if you will. But my invitation to people is, what would your life be like if you could totally trust yourself and your response, not your reactivity, but your response to how life is occurring and what is occurring? And if we could all just imagine a world where people felt that sense of inner safety, what would be possible? Because I do believe that that is the reason why we have this huge sense of separation and violence in the world and all of that, is because people feel unsafe in their bodies. And I learned that to a huge degree in my work in Rwanda with orphan head of households. So I think that's the big piece of this is, who would we be if we attained that sense of inner safety? Who would we be to ourselves, to our loved ones, to our children, to our community, to the people we want to serve? And then the bigger issue is, don't even think about serving anyone else until you have done your own trauma healing work. Yeah. That, of course, is a paramount message. And the big message there is, your number one service work in the world is truly being in service to your own healing first, because otherwise there's nowhere to go with that.
Yeah. Can you give us a little preview or a peek of what the formula is, what the grace process formula is?
The big reveal.
And I will say, because for listeners who, just so that listeners know, I've worked with Lori through the entire grace process, and I know that the little bit she's giving here is going to be a taster. You're going to have to get the book on September 14th in order to really dig in and really be able to understand this. But maybe just at a high level, give us what the formula is.
And I love that, because it is a formula. And when I received in deep meditation, I asked for, like, what is the next level of healing? I'm not happy with the current forms of therapy and healing. And when I got the formula, I was like, what? What do you mean a formula? But I will reveal it here. And just to say that it is very simple. The working of it, It requires a great deal of commitment and self-awareness and commitment to our sense of spiritual values and integrity. So it begins with choice. What am I choosing to heal? So important, right? Responsibility. I'm taking responsibility. And I ask people to think of their choice for healing in one sentence. What is it that you want the freedom from? So you have the freedom to. And there's a whole piece around that, because much of what we do in intention setting these days is about the freedom from. So if you say, I want the freedom from depression, well, what are you focused on? My depression. Well, where's the focus on? What do I want the freedom to be or do? And that's going to look different for everyone. Well, I want the freedom to have joy with this, or who knows? But if we're not focused on the freedom to, how are we ever going to get there? So we have that. Then we look at what is the ego, what are the ego blocks that are holding that unhealing in place. And so we look at all the judgments we have and all the unforgiveness we have about ourselves, about other people, about circumstances, and about the divine that are related to that healing I'm seeking. Because if you're focused on your judgments and your unforgiveness, you're saying, my grief and my trauma is more important than my healing. Now, that's a bonus in this interview. But all of that, as we transcend our ego, and I do use, and I know you do too, emotional freedom techniques, tapping, which is a great, powerful somatic release technique. That can move us out of ego so that we can be in those places of heart coherence, which again, this is all scientifically based. The energies of gratitude, love, joy, and wonder are the highest human resonance fields. And when we can achieve that, grace drops in instantaneously. And another word for grace, miracles, healing, transformation, ahas, that's when it drops in. And when I first learned this formula, I was like, okay, what did I know about grace? Grace dropped in when I was after excruciating physical pain, after excruciating emotional pain, after many dark nights of the soul experiences, after even being in silent retreat for days. Whatever it was, though, it was uncertain when it would drop in. But when I was in states of gratitude, love, joy, and wonder, that grace, that sense of connectedness, oneness, that all is well, peace and safety in the world and inside of my heart, emerged instantaneously. So that's when my higher self started to, my higher self has a great sense of humor. And I suggest that all of our higher selves have a great sense of humor. But it was like, okay, do you want to learn your lessons? Do you want to wait for your ego to become so exhausted that you just, fall apart and surrender that way? Or would you like to surrender in gratitude, love, joy, and wonder?
Yeah. Do you want the easy way or the hard way? Right.
But I was so good at the hard way.
I mean, aren't we all so good at the hard way? I mean, we like suffering for some reason. That reminds me of a funny joke. I think I've told you this one before. One of my friends, this is a long time ago, her mom used to say to her, if it makes you happy to be miserable, then go ahead and be happy. And it's like, yeah, we just sort of like the suffering piece is like, that's what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to suffer. But yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. And I can say firsthand, because I've done the grace process and I've, worked side by side with you using the grace process with your clients, with your students. And I have seen how, like, for lack of a better word, how graceful it really is, how elegant. That's a word that you use that I think is really apropos for the grace process. It's just simple. It's not hard. to do once you've been led through it. And it really is just so much more simple than banging your head against a wall and trying to figure things out, or going to therapy for years. And, that's what we do. Yeah. Which brings me to who is this book geared towards?
Well, I think the beauty of the book is that it doesn't matter whether you're just beginning your spiritual search or you've been on your search for a long time. I think for people who are finding themselves, which is why the 5 stages helps people identify quickly where they are in their journey. Whether you're a beginner or more experienced, we can all benefit. There's a constant upward spiral of healing. And my experience has been that people who come to the Embodying Grace framework early on, I think their healing is more accelerated because they haven't had this kind of heavy background of continuing to mine their brokenness. And so that's a huge piece. And then the other piece is that for people like ourselves who have been on a spiritual path for a long time and who may experience blocks or feeling like they're still not satisfied with where they are or what they've attained, but feeling like, oh, we should be perfect, and we should not need anything else besides what we're doing. As you know, I've done this work with some great evolutionary leaders and associational transformational leaders. This work is very profound for people who've been on a spiritual path for a long time and still looking for what are those vestiges of trauma that might be holding me back. What is that piece that I may have missed in that upward spiral of healing?
Yeah. And I would just add, this sort of goes on to that for anybody who is a therapist, a coach, a healing arts practitioner. This entire process is a tool that you can use in your bag of tools with your clients. It's just a very beautiful process to be able to use with your clients. So I would add that one in as well.
And thank you. Yeah, thank you for saying that, because over the last 20 years, even though I'm doing trauma healing in these various communities and working with the deepest of traumas, I find that it's really important to have a spiritual container for all of this. And the more that my work has gone to scaling and replicating, meaning more I want to help support people do this work in communities around the world, because I can't get everywhere all the time, even though I really want to. But this work has been the backbone of the work I've done around the world, to prepare myself to be fully present in my heart with no agenda, to whoever I'm serving in whatever community. And then this is the work that I bring to all of those really beautiful hearted people who want to serve and want to respond to great tragedies in the world, but may not have done their own work first. And maybe, not even prepared to think about what it's going to be like for them to sit in front of a mother who may have had her child murdered, or coming out of the tortures of war and all of that. And I think that's where all of our mental health training and supervision and mentoring still needs a lot more work. And so when people come to me for mentoring and they ask about clients, or they ask about their coaching people, or they ask about their family members, the first thing I do is say, okay, now, how do you feel? What are your judgments? This is not a cookie cutter. This is what, if they say this, you say that. This is, let's go deep inside. What is your reaction? What is your self-awareness about your own process? What are you bringing to the table in your work? That's where the depth and the breath comes in, where we can really begin to trust ourselves. And I think that, we don't train our service providers and our mental health professionals to have that trust and safety inside of them. So if they don't have the trust and safety inside of them, how are they going to deliver that? And this is not a judgment about people who really want to be helpful, but simply an invitation that there is a lot more depth. I know you do with your karmic warrior. I mean, it's all about a lifestyle. It's all about an understanding that is part of your life and how you live and breathe it.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things as we wrap up here, I want to just also note about your book is that you sprinkle throughout the book these vignettes, these really beautiful vignettes that are so vulnerable of just your own journey, and speaking exactly to what you just said, just how you had to go through your own healing in a very, very deep and profound way, and even the healing that you had to do to be able to go to Rwanda to do that work. And so much of that, and how the grace process was what you used to help you through that. So definitely for anybody who is a therapist, a coach, a counselor, just reading the book from that standpoint and seeing how Lori went through her own journey of healing to birth this entire process is, I think, a testament to her own integrity with doing this type of work, and being really committed to bringing it out into the world. So I want to thank you for that, Lori. And yeah, let's make sure we let people know, once again, we're going to put the link in the show description to where you can buy the book on Amazon on September 14th. That is when it's going to be available. You can buy it for $1.99. And anything else you want to say about the book before we wrap it up?
Well, I am so excited. So here's the most important thing, which is if you want to stay on top of this, my passion is to get this book into the hands of as many people as possible, which is why we're offering it for $1.99 on September 14th for 24 hours. And so the best thing that you can do is to sign up at the link that Lisa's going to provide to get information about exactly when you can order for that special price. And also on that page, you'll also see the reviews about the book. You'll see the book cover. And if you sign up there, you'll also get more of the kind of events, the free events we'll be doing that day, and more of the exciting reviews that have come in, which have been blowing my mind. So number one, sign up at this link so you can continue to receive information, and then these events on September 14th.
Beautiful. Well, as always, Lori, it's fun to have you as a guest on the podcast. Thank you for joining us and sharing this beautiful body of work that is finally getting out into the world. It's been wonderful to be here with you. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Lisa, as always.